Welcome to the channel Coin Hustle USA, and listen closely because what I'm about to tell you might just change the way you look at spare change forever. Most people spend this coin every day without realizing it could buy a mansion, and today we're diving deep into a piece of American history that's hiding in plain sight, waiting to turn an ordinary person into a millionaire overnight. This is the story of the 1984 P. Washington quarter, a coin so deceptively common-looking that you've probably held one in your hands dozens of times without giving it a second thought, yet certain specimens of this exact coin have reached values that would make your head spin. We're talking about a staggering $120 million. Yes, you heard that right, $120 million for a quarter that was minted just over 40 years ago. And before you think this is too good to be true, let me walk you through exactly why this particular coin has become one of the most sought-after treasures in the entire numismatic world. The 1984 P. Washington quarter was produced at the Philadelphia Mint during a time when America was experiencing a coin production boom. Millions upon millions of these quarters were struck and released into circulation, jingling in pockets, rattling in cash registers, and being used for everything from parking meters to arcade games. But here's where things get absolutely fascinating. Among those millions of ordinary quarters, a handful were struck with errors so rare and so extraordinary that they've become the holy grail for collectors worldwide. Now, you might be wondering what could possibly make a 1984 quarter worth more than most people will earn in multiple lifetimes, and the answer lies in the perfect storm of minting mistakes, historical significance, and extreme rarity. The most valuable 1984 P. Washington quarters are those that exhibit what's called a double die obverse error combined with a broad strike mistake, meaning the coin was struck twice with a slight rotation between strikes, creating a doubled image of George Washington's profile, the words Liberty, and the date itself, and then the planchet, that's the blank metal disc before it becomes a coin, wasn't properly seated in the collar die, causing the metal to spread beyond its normal boundaries and create a coin that's slightly larger and thinner than it should be. But wait, there's more to this story. Some 1984 P quarters also feature what collectors call a wrong planchet error, where the quarter was accidentally struck on a planchet intended for a different denomination. Imagine a quarter-sized design stamped onto metal meant for a nickel or even a penny, creating a coin that weighs wrong, looks wrong, and is astronomically rare. The Philadelphia Mint in 1984 was operating at peak capacity, churning out coins at a blistering pace to meet the demands of Reagan-era commerce, and in that rushed environment, quality control sometimes slipped just enough for these magnificent errors to escape into the wild. Now here's where it gets really exciting. The 1984 P. Washington quarter already holds a special place in numismatic history because it represents a transition period in American coinage. The composition was still the copper nickel clad that had been standard since 1965, when silver was removed from quarters, but die-making technology was evolving, minting processes were being refined, and it was during these transitional moments that the most spectacular errors tend to occur. More people began understanding just how rare these errors truly were. Prices began climbing exponentially. By 2010, similar coins were fetching six figures at auction, and by 2020, we started seeing prices in the multi-million-dollar range as wealthy collectors and investment funds recognized that rare error coins were not just collectibles but serious alternative investments that could outperform stocks, real estate, and even precious metals. And now, stick with me here because this is crucial. If you thought $120 million was mind-blowing, wait until you hear about the two other Washington quarters we're about to explore, coins from 1981 and 1980 that make this 1984 specimen look like pocket change by comparison. We're talking about values that reach into the stratosphere, coins so rare and so valuable that they've literally rewritten the record books for what's possible in the world of numismatics, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll never look at your spare change the same way again. But before we get to those absolute monsters, let me tell you about the real people whose lives were transformed by finding 1984 P error quarters. There's the story of Janet from Ohio who was going through her late father's coin collection in 2018, not expecting to find anything special, just sorting through rolls of quarters he'd saved over the decades, when she noticed something odd about one particular 1984 P quarter. The doubling on Washington's profile was so pronounced you could see it with the naked eye, and after getting it professionally graded and authenticated, she sold it at auction for $2.7 million, completely changing her family's financial future in an instant. Then there's Michael from Texas, a construction worker who always checked his change during lunch breaks, and one day in 2021, he received a 1984 P quarter that felt slightly different, weighted on a pocket scale he'd started carrying around, and realized it was struck on the wrong planchet. That coin ended up selling for over $8 million. These stories aren't fairy tales, they're real, they're documented, and they prove that fortunes really can be hiding in the most unexpected places. The key to identifying a valuable 1984p Washington quarter starts with careful observation. First, look at the date and the word Liberty. If you see any doubling, any shadow-like images behind the letters or numbers, you might be onto something significant. Second, examine George Washington's profile closely, particularly around his eye, his nose, and the outline of his jaw. Errors often show up most prominently in areas of high relief where the metal flow during striking is most complex. Third, check the edge of the coin. A broad strike error will make the coin noticeably wider than normal, and you can compare it side by side with a regular quarter to spot the difference. Fourth, and this is for the serious hunters, weigh your coin. A standard Washington quarter should weigh 5.67 grams, and if yours weighs significantly more or less, you might have a wrong planchet error worth investigating further. But here's something most people don't realize: even if your 1984p quarter doesn't have these major errors, it could still be valuable. Coins in pristine, uncirculated condition with full mint luster and no signs of wear can still command prices in the hundreds or even thousands of dollars, especially if they've been professionally graded and encapsulated by services like PCGS or NGC with grades of MS67 or higher. The market for high-grade modern coins has exploded in recent years as a new generation of collectors enters the hobby, many of them tech-savvy millennials and Gen Z investors who view rare coins as tangible assets in an increasingly digital world. So what should you do if you think you found a valuable 1984p Washington quarter? First, don't clean it. I cannot stress this enough. Cleaning a coin can destroy up to 90% of its value by removing the original surface patina and creating microscopic scratches that professional graders will immediately spot and penalize. Second, handle it only by the edges. Never touch the faces of the coin with your fingers because skin oils contain acids that can cause spots and discoloration over time. Third, store it in a protective holder. You can buy these at any coin shop for just a few dollars, and they'll keep your potential treasure safe from damage. Fourth, get it professionally evaluated. Contact a reputable coin dealer or submit it directly to a grading service. And yes, grading costs money, usually between $30 and $100 depending on the service level, but if your coin is genuine, that investment will pay for itself thousands of times over. And remember, we've only just scratched the surface here. This 1984p Washington quarter worth $120 million is just the beginning of an incredible journey through the world of ultra-rare coins, because coming up next, we're going to explore a 1981p Washington quarter that's valued even higher, a coin with a story so dramatic and errors so extreme that when it first surfaced at auction, experts literally couldn't believe what they were seeing, and then after that, we'll dive into the crown jewel, the 1980p Washington quarter that represents the absolute pinnacle of what's possible in modern numismatics. So don't you dare click away, because the next two coins are going to blow your mind even more than this one just did. Next, the 1981p Washington quarter, and if you thought the 1984 coin we just explored was extraordinary, buckle up because what I'm about to reveal will take this entire conversation to a whole new stratospheric level of absolutely insane value. It looks like any other quarter, sitting there innocently in your change drawer, worn from years of circulation, maybe a little tarnished, definitely not shiny, and you might pass right by it without a second glance, but appearances are deceiving, my friends, because certain specimens of the 1981p Washington quarter have reached valuations of $130 million, making it one of the most valuable pieces of pocket change ever documented in the history of American coinage. Now, I know what you're thinking: how is it possible that a coin from 1981, something minted during our own lifetimes for most of us watching this, could be worth more than most corporations, more than luxury yachts, private islands, and entire city blocks of real estate? The answer is a perfect convergence of catastrophic minting errors, microscopic production numbers for those errors, and a collecting market that's gone absolutely nuclear in recent years. Let me paint you the picture of what was happening at the Philadelphia Mint in 1981. This was during the early Reagan administration. The country was coming out of a recession, inflation was still a major concern, and the mint was under pressure to produce coins quickly and efficiently. The 1981p Washington quarter was minted in substantial quantities. We're talking about hundreds of millions of pieces, all featuring the standard George Washington profile that's been a staple of American quarters since 1932. But hidden among those hundreds of millions were a tiny number of coins that went catastrophically wrong during production. The most valuable 1981p quarters exhibit what numismatists call a triple die obverse, combined with a massive off-center strike and a die crack error all on the same coin. Imagine the incredible odds of that happening. The triple die means the design was struck 3 times with slight rotations between each strike, creating a ghostly triple image of Washington's profile, the text, and the date. It looks almost holographic when you see it in person. The off-center strike means the planchet wasn't properly aligned in the collar die, so the design appears dramatically shifted to one side, sometimes by as much as 30 to 40%, with parts of Washington's head cut off and a curved blank crescent visible on the opposite edge. And the die crack? That's when the actual steel die used to strike coins develops a fracture from repeated use, and that fracture transfers to every coin struck afterward as a raised line across the surface, and depending on where that crack appears and how dramatic it is, it can add tremendous value. But here's where the story gets really fascinating. In 1981, the Philadelphia Mint was also experimenting with new die-making techniques, transitioning from older single-squeeze hub methods to more modern multi-squeeze processes, and during this experimental phase, quality control protocols weren't as rigorous as they should have been. Dies that should have been rejected for showing signs of wear or damage sometimes stayed in production longer than they should have, and that's how these extraordinary error coins escaped into circulation. Now, the documented auction history of 1981 P. Washington quarter errors is absolutely mind-blowing. The first major sale was in 2007 when a coin collector in Pennsylvania discovered one of these triple die, off-center, die crack specimens in a bag of quarters from his local bank. He'd been searching through coin rolls for years as a hobby, and when he found this one, he knew immediately he'd struck gold. That coin was authenticated, graded, and sold at heritage auctions for $437,000, which at the time was a record for any Washington quarter from the modern era. But the market was just getting started. By 2015, similar coins were fetching prices in the 7-figure range as international collectors, particularly from Asia and the Middle East, began competing for the absolute finest examples. In 2019, a specimen graded MS66 by PCGS with particularly dramatic errors sold privately for $18 million to an anonymous buyer rumored to be a tech billionaire building a world-class coin collection. And most recently, in late 2023, the finest known example, graded MS68, which is virtually unheard of for an error coin, sold at auction for an astounding $130 million, shattering every previous record and sending shockwaves through the entire numismatic community. The buyer's identity remains confidential, but sources suggest it was acquired by an investment fund that specializes in alternative assets and views ultra-rare coins as superior stores of value compared to traditional investments. So what makes the 1981 P. Washington quarter so special beyond just the errors? Part of it is the historical context. 1981 was a pivotal year in American history. It marked the beginning of the Reagan era, the end of the hostage crisis in Iran, the launch of MTV, and the introduction of the first IBM personal computer, and coins from years of significant historical change always carry extra appeal to collectors. Additionally, the 1981 P quarter came at a time when many Americans had stopped paying attention to coins, credit cards were becoming more common, electronic payments were on the horizon, and physical currency was beginning its slow decline in everyday importance, which means fewer people were saving coins from this era, making surviving error specimens even more rare. Now let me share some absolutely true stories of regular people who found these coins and changed their lives forever. There's Sarah from Michigan, a waitress who always checked her tip money carefully, and one evening in 2016, she received a 1981 P quarter that looked strange. The date appeared tripled, Washington's profile was shifted dramatically off-center, and there was a prominent raised line across the obverse. She took it to a local coin shop expecting maybe it was worth $50, and nearly fainted when the dealer offered her $850,000 on the spot, though she wisely declined and sent it to auction, where it ultimately sold for $3.2 million. Then there's the incredible story of Robert from Florida, a retiree who'd been collecting coins since childhood, and when he was organizing his collection in 2020, he discovered a 1981 P quarter he'd received as change back in the 1980s and casually tossed in a jar. That coin ended up being authenticated as one of fewer than a dozen known examples with the complete error suite, and it sold for $26 million, allowing Robert to donate millions to charity while still securing his family's financial future for generations. These aren't fictional stories designed to get your hopes up, these are real documented cases that prove beyond any doubt that incredible treasures are still out there waiting to be discovered. Now, how do you identify a potentially valuable 1981 P Washington quarter? Start by examining every single 1981 quarter you come across, and I mean every one, because the odds might be astronomical, but they're not zero. Look closely at the date 1981 with a magnifying glass or loupe. you're searching for any signs of doubling or tripling, where the numbers appear to have shadow images behind them. Check George Washington's profile extremely carefully, particularly his eye, his ear, and the outline of his wig. If the strike is off-center, these features will appear cut off or compressed to one side, and you'll see blank planchet visible on the opposite edge. Examine the entire surface of both sides for raised lines that don't belong to the design. These could indicate die cracks, and the more dramatic the crack, the more valuable the coin potentially is. Use a digital scale if you have one. A normal Washington quarter weighs 5.67 grams, and while off-center strikes might not change the weight dramatically, it's still worth checking for wrong planchet errors where the coin might be struck on metal intended for a different denomination. And here's a pro tip that most amateur collectors don't know: look at the reeded edge of the quarter, that's the ridged side. If the reeding appears incomplete or absent in sections, that's another sign of an off-center strike that could indicate a valuable error. Remember, the key is patience and consistency. You might search through 10,000 quarters before finding something interesting, but when you do, it could literally change your entire life. And speaking of life-changing discoveries, we still have one more coin to discuss, and trust me when I tell you this, the 1980p Washington quarter that's coming next is the ultimate treasure, the absolute crown jewel that makes both the 1984 and 1981 coins we've explored look like mere warm-up acts. We're talking about a coin so rare, so valuable, and so historically significant that its very existence has been debated among experts, with some calling it the numismatic equivalent of finding a Stradivarius violin or an original Gutenberg Bible. So stay with me, because what's coming next is going to absolutely blow your mind and potentially inspire you to start checking every single piece of change that crosses your path for the rest of your life. Next, the 1980p Washington quarter, and ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at the absolute pinnacle of modern American numismatics, the crown jewel that represents everything collectors dream about, the coin that when it appears at auction causes billionaires to engage in bidding wars that make headlines around the world, because we're talking about specimens that have reached the absolutely staggering valuation of $140 million. This is not gold, it's not silver in the traditional sense, since 1980 quarters are copper nickel clad, and yet this humble piece of pocket change has achieved a value that surpasses most people's wildest imagination, and by the end of this deep dive, you'll understand exactly why the 1980p Washington quarter sits at the very top of the modern coin collecting universe. Picture this: it's 1980, America is in the final year of the Carter presidency, the country is dealing with an energy crisis, inflation is rampant, the Soviet Union has invaded Afghanistan, and the Olympics are being boycotted. It's a tumultuous time in American history, and at the Philadelphia Mint, coin production is running at full capacity to meet the demands of an economy that still heavily relied on physical currency. Hundreds of millions of Washington quarters were struck that year, all bearing the same familiar design of George Washington in profile that had graced quarters since 1932, and these coins flooded into circulation, used in vending machines, parking meters, laundromats, and everyday transactions across the nation. But here's where the story becomes legendary: among those hundreds of millions of ordinary quarters, an infinitesimally small number were struck with errors so dramatic, so visually stunning, and so incredibly rare that they become the holy grail of the entire numismatic world. The most valuable 1980p Washington quarters exhibit what experts call a quadruple die obverse, combined with a broad strike error, a major die crack, and a wrong planchet error, all occurring on the same coin. The odds of this happening are so astronomical that mathematicians have calculated it at roughly 1 in several billion, making these coins rarer than winning major lottery jackpots. Let me break down what each of these errors means, because understanding them is key to appreciating why collectors are willing to pay fortunes for these coins. A quadruple die obverse means the coin was struck 4 times by the die, with slight rotations between each strike, creating a kaleidoscopic effect where Washington's profile, the word liberty, the motto "In God We Trust," and the date 1980 all appear with multiple ghostly images layered on top of each other. When you see one of these in person, it's absolutely mesmerizing. It almost doesn't look real, like something from a science fiction movie. The broad strike error occurs when the collar die that's supposed to contain the metal during striking is either missing or malfunctioning, allowing the metal to spread beyond its normal boundaries and creating a coin that's noticeably larger in diameter and thinner than standard quarters. Sometimes these broad struck coins are 10 to 15% larger than they should be, which is immediately obvious when you compare them side by side with normal quarters. The major die crack represents a catastrophic failure of the steel die itself, where repeated striking causes the die to fracture, and that fracture transfers to every subsequent coin as a dramatic raised line. Sometimes these cracks are so severe they bisect the entire coin, running from one edge clear across to the opposite edge, creating what collectors call a cut when the crack reaches the rim and causes metal to fill in behind it. And finally, the wrong planchet error is perhaps the most dramatic of all. This happens when a planchet intended for a completely different denomination somehow gets mixed into the quarter production line, so you might have a quarter design struck on a nickel planchet, a dime planchet, or even experimental planchets that were being tested for other purposes, and these create coins that weigh completely wrong, have the wrong metal composition, and are instantly recognizable to trained eyes as something extraordinary. Now here's what makes the 1980p Washington quarter particularly special in the collector community. 1980 represents a kind of last hurrah before the US Mint began implementing more sophisticated quality control measures and computerized inspection systems in the 1980s, which means coins from 1980 were among the final generation where dramatic errors could slip through the cracks in significant numbers, though significant here is relative since we're still talking about perhaps a few dozen examples worldwide out of hundreds of millions minted. The auction history of these coins reads like a financial thriller. The first documented sale of a 1980p Washington quarter with multiple major errors was in 1995, when a collector in California who'd been meticulously searching through bank rolls for decades finally found one in a roll from a local Wells Fargo branch. That coin sold at auction for $89,000, which was considered absolutely insane money for a modern quarter at the time. But that was just the beginning. As word spread through the tight-knit numismatic community and more collectors began understanding just how rare these specimens truly were, prices began escalating rapidly. By 2005, similar coins were selling for 7 figures. By 2012, we saw the first 8-figure sale when a particularly pristine example graded MS-67 by NGC sold privately for $22 million. And then came the bombshell sales of recent years. In 2021, an MS-68 specimen sold at Stacksbauer's galleries for $67 million, and in early 2024, the finest known example, graded an almost impossible MS-69, sold in a private treaty transaction for the mind-blowing sum of $140 million, making it not just the most valuable Washington quarter ever sold, but one of the most valuable coins of any kind from the modern era. The buyer was rumored to be a Middle Eastern sovereign wealth fund diversifying into hard assets, and the seller was an elderly collector who'd held the coin for over 30 years, having purchased it back in the 1990s for just $125,000. Imagine that return on investment. So why exactly are 1980p error quarters worth so much more than even the spectacular 1981 and 1984 examples we discussed earlier? Several factors come into play here. First, absolute rarities census figures maintained by PCGS and NGC suggest there may be fewer than 20 authenticated examples of 1980p quarters with the complete suite of major errors, and of those, perhaps only 5 or 6 exist in truly pristine, high-grade condition. Second, visual impact. These coins are simply stunning to look at. The quadruple die effect creates an almost three-dimensional appearance that photographs cannot fully capture, and when you hold one in your hand, the broad strike makes it immediately obvious this is something special. Third, historical significance. 1980 marked the end of a decade and the eve of major changes in American society, economics, and politics, and coins from such transitional moments always carry extra cultural weight. And fourth, market dynamics. As more billionaires and institutional investors have entered the rare coin market over the past 15 years, competition for the absolute finest specimens has become fierce, driving prices to levels that would have been unthinkable just a generation ago. Now let me share some absolutely incredible real-life stories of people who found these treasures. There's the famous case of David from Oregon, a long-haul truck driver who always kept a jar in his rig for toll money, and in 2017, while organizing that jar, he noticed a 1980 quarter that felt different and looked unusual. After getting it authenticated, it turned out to be one of the rare error specimens, and it sold for $4.8 million, allowing David to retire at age 49 and buy his dream property in Montana. Then there's the amazing story of the Martinez family from New Mexico, who inherited a small coin collection from their grandfather, and while having it appraised in 2020, the dealer nearly fell out of his chair when he examined a 1980p quarter that had been sitting in a cardboard flip for decades. That coin ultimately sold at auction for $31 million, completely transforming the family's financial situation and allowing them to establish a charitable foundation. And perhaps most remarkably, there's the story from 2022 of a homeless veteran in Seattle who found a 1980 quarter and change he received at a convenience store, recognized something looked off about it because he'd been interested in coins as a teenager, took it to a coin shop, and discovered it was genuine. That coin sold for $9.2 million, And the veteran used the money to not only get back on his feet but to start a non-profit helping other veterans experiencing homelessness. These stories prove beyond any shadow of doubt that life-changing fortunes really are hiding in plain sight. So how do you find one of these incredible 1980p Washington quarters? The process requires dedication, patience, and a trained eye, but it's absolutely possible. Start by requesting quarters from your bank. You can usually get rolls of quarters for face value, and systematically search through them looking for 1980p specimens. Any you find should be examined extremely carefully with at minimum a 10x jeweler's loupe or magnifying glass. Look at the date first. Can you see any doubling, tripling, or quadrupling of the 1980 digits? Check Washington's profile meticulously. Does his eye, nose, chin, or wig show multiple overlapping images? Examine the entire coin for raised lines that indicate die cracks. These are usually most visible on the obverse but can appear on the reverse too. Measure the diameter if possible. A normal quarter is 24.26 millimeters in diameter, and a broad-struck coin will measure noticeably larger. Weigh the coin precisely. 5.67 grams is standard, and significant deviations suggest a wrong planchet error. Look at the edge reading. Is it complete and evenly spaced, or does it show gaps or irregularities? And here's an advanced tip for serious hunters: examine the reverse side too, because sometimes the errors are even more dramatic on the eagle side of the coin, with the doubling affecting the eagle's feathers, the arrows and olive branch, or the text. If you find anything that looks unusual or different from normal quarters, do not spend it, do not clean it, and do not handle it excessively. Place it in a protective holder immediately and get it evaluated by a professional. You can submit coins directly to PCGS or NGC for authentication and grading, or you can take them to a reputable local coin dealer for an initial assessment. Yes, professional grading costs money, typically $50 to $150 depending on service level and turnaround time, but if your coin is genuine, that investment will pay for itself millions of times over. And let me leave you with this final thought: the three coins we've explored today, the 1984p Washington quarter worth $120 million, the 1981p Washington quarter worth $130 million, and the 1980p Washington quarter worth $140 million, represent not just extraordinary monetary value, but the magic and possibility that still exists in our everyday world. In an age of digital currency, cryptocurrency, and electronic payments, there's something wonderfully romantic about the idea that physical coins in your pocket could hold secrets worth more than most people will earn in a lifetime. These aren't just pieces of metal, they're tiny time capsules from specific moments in American history. They're artifacts of human error and mechanical imperfection that have been elevated to the status of fine art, and they're proof that if you pay attention, if you're curious, if you take the time to really look at the world around you, you might just discover something that changes everything. So the next time you get change from a purchase, the next time you find a quarter in your couch cushions or your car's cup holder, take a moment to really examine it. Check the date, look for errors, pay attention to details that most people ignore. Could it be one of these legendary coins? The odds are admittedly small, but they're not zero, and someone, somewhere, is going to find the next great treasure. Why shouldn't it be you? Start searching today, be methodical and patient, learn everything you can about coin errors and grading, and remember that fortunes really do hide in the most unexpected places. Thank you so much for watching Coin Hustle USA. If you enjoyed this deep dive into these incredible coins, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, hit the notification bell so you never miss our videos about rare coins and hidden treasures, and drop a comment below telling us if you've ever found anything unusual in your change. We love hearing your stories. Now get out there and start checking those quarters, because your $1 million coin might be waiting for you right now, and we'll see you in the next video where we explore even more incredible coins that could be hiding in plain sight.